I asked my son, "Why didn't you tell me about Christmas?" David leaned against his front door, arms crossed, blocking my view of his living room. He shrugged, looking over my shoulder at my parked sedan rather than meeting my eyes. "It was better without you, Mom. Sarah wanted a stress-free morning with the kids. You always make things so heavy." He had no idea what I was scheduled to sign the next morning. It was December 25th, slightly past noon. I stood on his porch holding a tin of homemade pecan sandies and 2 wrapped boxes for my grandchildren. I had driven over to see what time they wanted me for dinner, only to find the driveway full of empty cardboard boxes and torn wrapping paper sticking out of their trash bins. Through the living room window, I had seen Sarah's parents sitting on the sofa, drinking eggnog and laughing. They had done Christmas morning. They had done the gifts, the breakfast, the photos. And nobody had picked up a phone to include me. "Heavy," I repeated. The cold wind bit at the collar of my wool coat, but I barely felt it. I didn't drop the gifts. I didn't raise my voice or ask why Sarah's parents were currently sitting in the warm house while I stood on the welcome mat. "Yeah," David sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sarah just felt like you judge how we parent. We just wanted to relax today. I meant to text you, but things got busy." I looked at my son, a 34-year-old man who found it easier to ghost his widowed mother on a holiday than have a difficult conversation. "I see," I murmured. I turned around and walked down the steps. "Mom, come on, don't do this," David called out, his tone dripping with an exhausted kind of annoyance. "We can do lunch next week." I opened my car door, set the gifts in the passenger seat, and started the engine. I didn't look back as I backed out of his driveway. The drive home was perfectly quiet, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a very clear path forward. My house felt completely still when I unlocked the front door. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked out a steady rhythm, grounding me in the silence. I hung my coat in the closet, walked into the kitchen, and set the tin of cookies on the counter. I didn't sit down to cry. Tears wouldn't change the fact that my son viewed me as a burden. Instead, I walked straight to the dining room. Resting squarely in the center of my mahogany table was a thick manila folder. Inside were the bank forms I was supposed to sign the very next morning, December 26th. David and Sarah had recently decided their 3-bedroom house was too small. They wanted a primary suite addition complete with a walk-in closet and a soaking tub. David's salary barely covered their current mortgage, and Sarah worked part-time, spending most of her income on organic meal deliveries and boutique fitness classes. The bank had denied their home equity loan, so they had come to me. 2 months ago, sitting at this exact table, David had looked at me with pleading eyes, while Sarah promised I would always have a dedicated guest room in the new addition. I had relented. I agreed to transfer $85,000 from my late husband's trust directly to their contractor to fund the build. The final authorization required my in-person signature at the branch tomorrow. I opened the folder. The numbers stared back at me in stark black and white. $85,000. It was a massive sum, one that would put a dent in my comfortable retirement. But I had convinced myself it was an investment in my family's happiness. I pulled a chair out and sat down. I traced the edge of the paper with my index finger. "It was better without you." The words played back in my head, stripped of any emotion, just a flat statement of fact. If my presence ruined their peace, my money certainly shouldn't disrupt it either. I picked up the folder, walked into my home office, and dropped it straight into the paper shredder. The machine roared to life, eating the documents in seconds. The bank opened at 9 o'clock. I was the second person through the glass doors, holding a fresh cup of coffee and a calm demeanor. My personal banker, a polite young man named Thomas, smiled when I sat at his desk. "Mrs. Spencer, good morning. We have the contractor transfer documents ready for your signature. There's been a change of plans. Thomas. I replied, setting my purse on the chair next to me. Cancel the transfer. I won't be funding the renovation. Thomas blinked his hand, hovering over his keyboard. Cancel completely. Not just postpone. Completely. I took a sip of my coffee. Also, I need to make some changes to my accounts. I want my son's name removed as an authorized user on the backup credit card. A few years ago, when David's car broke down, I added him to one of my cards for emergencies. Over time, those emergencies had morphed into weekly grocery runs for Sarah and spontaneous Amazon purchases. I had paid the balance quietly, avoiding conflict. Right away, Mrs. Spencer. You'll need to sign a few release forms. Thomas printed the papers, and I signed my name with a steady hand. By 9:40, the financial umbilical cord was officially severed. I walked out of the bank, feeling a strange sense of lightness. The cold morning air felt crisp and clean in my lungs. Instead of going straight home, I drove to the local hardware store. I walked down the aisles until I found the lock hardware section. I picked out 2 heavy-duty deadbolts for my front and back doors. David had possessed a key to my house since he moved out for college. He used it rarely, usually only to drop off the grandchildren when they needed a free babysitter on short notice. I paid for the locks in cash. The young clerk asked if I needed a professional to install them. I smiled politely. My late husband had taught me how to change a deadbolt 20 years ago. I didn't need any help securing my own home. I spent the afternoon with a Phillips head screwdriver and a cup of Earl Grey tea. Changing the locks took less than 45 minutes. Once the new brass fixtures were securely in place, I tested the keys, locked both doors, and finally sat down in my favorite armchair by the window. At exactly 2:15 p.m., my cell phone buzzed against the wooden side table. The caller ID flashed David's name. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started again. This time, I picked up my knitting needles and focused on the blue scarf I was making. The phone buzzed a third time, then fell silent. A moment later, a text message chimed. Mom, where are you? The contractor is at the house waiting for the deposit confirmation. I kept knitting. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. It was Sarah. I watched her name glow on the screen until it went to voicemail. I could picture the scene at their house perfectly. The contractor pacing in the kitchen, Sarah frantically refreshing her banking app, and David realizing that his actions the day prior might have consequences. My phone dinged with another text from David. Bank says the transfer was canceled. Did something happen with the paperwork? Call me back ASAP, the crew is supposed to start demolition tomorrow. I set my knitting down, picked up the phone, and typed a single brief reply. The paperwork is fine. I canceled the transfer. I decided it isn't a good financial decision for me right now. I hit send, then turned the phone completely off. I placed it in the drawer of the side table and closed it. The quiet in my living room was absolute. I walked into the kitchen, decided to make a small roast for dinner, and began chopping vegetables. There was no rush, no anxiety, no dread. Just the steady rhythm of the knife against the cutting board, completely undisturbed by the panic I knew was unfolding across town. The doorbell rang at 5:30, just as I was pulling the roast out of the oven. I set the pan on the stove, wiped my hands on a towel, and walked to the front door. I didn't open it immediately. Through the glass side panel, I saw David and Sarah standing on my porch. David was holding his old key, staring down at the doorknob in sheer confusion. Sarah's arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her face flushed red against the evening chill. I unlocked the new deadbolt and opened the door just enough to stand in the frame. Your key won't work, I stated calmly. I changed the locks this afternoon. David's jaw dropped slightly. Mom, what is going on? Why did you cancel the transfer? The contractor packed up his truck and left. He's threatening to charge us a cancellation fee. Sarah stepped forward, bypassing her husband entirely. Josephine, this is entirely unprofessional. We had an agreement. You can't just pull the rug out from under us the day before demolition. I'm not a bank, Sarah, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. And this wasn't a professional contract. It was a favor. A favor, you promised. Sarah snapped, her carefully curated, polite demeanor crumbling. We've already picked out the tile. The vanity is on back order. You are ruining months of planning. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said. David finally found his voice. Mom, why are you acting like this? Is this because of yesterday? Are you punishing us because we wanted a quiet Christmas? I looked at my son, noting the genuine confusion in his eyes. He truly believed he was the victim here. You told me my presence made your life heavy, David. You said it was better without me. I held his gaze until he looked down at his shoes. I listened to you. I removed myself. That includes removing my finances from your household. You wanted a stress-free environment. I'm simply giving you the independence you asked for. Sarah let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Oh my God. Are you serious? You're throwing a tantrum over Christmas dinner. I'm not throwing a tantrum, Sarah. I'm standing quietly in my own home, I pointed out. You owe us this money, she demanded, stepping closer to the doorframe. We have put up with you stopping by unannounced. We let you see the kids. We include you in our lives. The least you can do is help us upgrade a house we are outgrowing. David winced slightly, but didn't intervene. He just stood there, letting his wife speak to me like a disobedient child. You tolerate me for my checkbook, I said. It wasn't a question. Hearing her say it out loud removed any lingering guilt I might have had. You find me tedious, but you find my savings account useful. That's not true, David mumbled, though he sounded remarkably unconvincing. If it's not true, then you won't mind paying for your own renovation, I replied. Sarah's eyes narrowed. You're acting crazy. We are your only family. If you cut us off, you're going to be completely alone in this big, dusty house. I would rather be alone in a dusty house than buy my way into a family that doesn't want me, I said. I stepped back and gripped the edge of the door. You need to figure out your contractor situation, David. I won't be discussing this further. Mom, wait. Let's just sit down and... Good night, David. Good night, Sarah. I closed the door firmly. The new deadbolt slid into place with a heavy, satisfying click. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to Sarah's muffled voice complaining loudly outside. I didn't peek through the curtains. I didn't second-guess myself. I walked back to the kitchen, sliced a piece of roast, and sat down at my dining room table to enjoy my dinner while it was still hot. 2 days later, I was watering the ferns on my back patio when I checked my banking app. It was a habit I'd formed over the last few years, mostly to keep track of what David and Sarah were spending on my emergency credit card. I tapped the screen and opened the transaction history for the card I had canceled. There were 3 declined charges from that morning. One at a high-end grocery store for $240. Another at a children's boutique for $115. The third was a charge for an upscale coffee shop. Sarah had gone shopping. I set my phone down on the patio table and smiled into the morning sun. I could imagine the scene perfectly. Sarah standing at the register, her reusable canvas bags packed with imported cheeses and organic produce, confidently swiping the card she assumed I was still paying for. The confusion when the machine beeped red. The embarrassment of having to pull out her own debit card, the one attached to an account that was likely strained by their lifestyle. For years, I had quietly absorbed those costs. I had told myself it was helping the grandchildren, even though I knew a toddler didn't need a $40 sweater. I had allowed them to slowly blur the line between a grandmother's generosity and an endless line of credit. By taking away the money, I hadn't just saved my retirement. I had forced them to face their actual reality. My phone buzzed. A text from David. "Mom, did you cancel the emergency card? Sarah was at the store and her transaction declined." It was humiliating for her. I wiped my hands on a towel, picked up the phone, and typed my response. "Yes. The emergency card is closed. You'll need to use your own cards from now on." I didn't offer an apology or an explanation. I hit send, turned the screen off, and went back to watering my ferns. The boundary was set, and for the first time in years, my finances belonged entirely to me. A week passed without a word from either of them. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find David standing alone on the porch. He wasn't wearing his usual confident posture. His shoulders were slumped and he looked genuinely exhausted. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside, leaving the door open just long enough for him to wipe his shoes on the mat. He walked into the living room and stood awkwardly near the sofa, clearly unsure of where he belonged in a house he used to treat like a hotel. "I'm sorry," he finally said. About Christmas. About what I said. It was stupid and mean. I sat down in my armchair. "Have a seat, David." He sat on the edge of the sofa, wringing his hands. "Sarah is really stressed. The contractor charged us $1,000 for the late cancellation. We had to put it on a high-interest credit card. Without your backup card, we're having to rethink our whole budget." I listened to him, observing his tone. He wasn't apologizing because he realized he had hurt my feelings. He was apologizing because the consequences of hurting my feelings were financially inconvenient. "Budgeting is a normal part of being an adult." "David," I stated, "I know, but Mom, we really need that addition. The kids are getting bigger. If you could just reconsider the transfer, we can put this all behind us. We'll invite you over for Sunday dinners. You can have more time with the kids." He was offering me a transaction. My money for a seat at their table. "No," I said firmly. David blinked, stunned. "No, I'm not funding the addition. I'm not reopening the credit card. I love you, David, and I love my grandchildren, but I am done being your safety net." I leaned forward slightly. "You are 34. It's time you and Sarah build a life you can actually afford, instead of one I pay for." David didn't argue. The quiet finality in my voice seemed to strip the fight right out of him. He left shortly after, shoulders heavier than when he arrived. But there was one final loose end to tie up. 2 years ago, when Sarah got pregnant with their second child, they claimed they desperately needed a larger vehicle. I had purchased a lightly used Honda Pilot for them to use. I paid in full. The title remained strictly in my name, and I paid the insurance, but the car sat in their driveway. The next morning, I called a local rideshare service and had them drop me off a block from David's house. I walked the rest of the way, holding the spare key fob in my pocket. The Pilot was parked on the street exactly where Sarah usually left it. I walked up to the driver's side, unlocked the door, and slid into the seat. The interior smelled like stale French fries and expensive perfume. I started the engine. Before I pulled away, I sent a brief text to David. "I've picked up the Honda. Since you are restructuring your budget, you'll need to rely on your sedan. I'll be selling the Pilot this week." I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I didn't wait for a reply. By the time I reached my own driveway, my phone was buzzing with missed calls. I ignored them all. I spent the afternoon cleaning out the car. I packed the scattered toys, a few stray sunglasses, and 2 car seats neatly into a large cardboard box. I left the box on their front porch while they were out, sending one final text to let them know where their belongings were. Taking the car wasn't about being vindictive. It was about closing the final door on their assumption that what was mine automatically belonged to them. 6 months later, my life looked entirely different, mostly because it was finally my own. I sold the Honda Pilot and used the funds to renovate my own kitchen. I chose bright, warm cabinets and a beautiful marble countertop. I didn't have to consult anyone about the tile choices or worry if the budget was getting out of hand. I paid the contractor directly, enjoying the quiet hum of progress in my own home. David and Sarah didn't get their addition. They had to reorganize the bedrooms to make the existing space work. I heard from a mutual neighbor that Sarah eventually went back to work full-time to help cover their credit card debt. We still spoke, but the dynamic had permanently shifted. The boundaries were rigid. When I visited to see my grandchildren, I stayed for an hour, brought a modest toy, and left before dinner. They didn't ask me for money, and I didn't offer it. One Sunday afternoon, David dropped the kids off for a brief visit. He stood in my new kitchen looking around at the bright, updated space. "It looks really nice in here, Mom," he said, a hint of genuine appreciation in his voice. "Thank you," I replied, pouring 2 glasses of lemonade for the kids. We're figuring things out," he added quietly, watching me wipe the counter. "It's been hard, but I think Sarah and I are finally getting on the same page about money." I nodded. "I'm glad to hear that, David." I didn't offer praise, and I didn't offer a check. I handed the lemonades to my grandchildren and smiled. I had learned that respect isn't something you can buy with an emergency credit card or a massive bank transfer. It's built on boundaries. I wasn't heavy anymore. In fact, standing in my quiet, beautiful house, I had never felt lighter.